Hi, I'm George Nordhaus, and welcome to Monday Morning. And this is really a different one, and this is one that's going to mean a whole lot to you and people in your agency because you're going to learn something that you probably didn't know before. Maybe you did, but I kind of doubt it. Because Dan Epstein, who's the CEO of ResourcePro, uh, and I've known him for 10 years or something more, I guess, Dan, something like that. Anyhow, it's been a long time. And anyhow, he's developed Research Pro beautifully, but he's developed something here that just is exciting to me. And when he told me about it, I said, Dan, we got to do a Monday morning. Let me tell you about Dan first of all, then we'll go into more depth. Let me show you Dan's picture and tell you a little bit about him. He is, let's move forward to the picture here. And there we go. uh, Dan, he came to Research Pro in 2005. I think that's when we first knew each other, Dan, something like that. When you spoke for me that time, that's about the time, wasn't it? You were new?
Yeah, something like
Something
that.
like that,
Yeah.
yeah. And they have about 250 insurance clients. They got 2,000 employees across the country in China and other countries. It's an amazing organization. We'll tell you a little bit more about it before we quit. Um, Dan worked for a long time in technology, understands it, and the thing that I was very impressed about the U.S. Israel Business Insurance Business Exchange. I got to hear about that sometime, but we'll go more in depth with that. But I didn't realize that you were with the embassy there, the Israeli embassy in Washington until you sent this to me, and I didn't know you were was that an army guy? I guess it is in Israel.
hmm
It's
hmm
That's army, isn't it? There isn't anything
Yeah.
else, huh? Yeah. You went to Columbia Business School, Master's in International Relations from Insurance School of Economics of the London School. God, that is really a great school because I remember it from my time in London. But anyhow, it's a hell of a background, Dan. I guess people tell
Well,
you that
we
all.
all have a past.
What? We all have a what? A path?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. Well, you're going to talk to us about something today, and I think we need to lay the groundwork for it. So it's your nickel. Let's go at it. 1, 2.
Yeah. Thank you, George. It's great to have this opportunity of chatting with you today, and it's been, as you said, about 10 years that we've known each other, and it's been great to know you.
Thank you.
Um, so we've been really passionate in our company about an area of our industry, of our business, the insurance industry, which we think has a relatively neglected opportunity, and that is driving profitable growth through efficient operations. And we're all chasing growth, and the question is, how do we get there? And as we've been in the industry, we've found that most insurance organizations are chasing growth, and the way they get there is through hiring producers and specialists, investing in the kind of automation that frees up people, so new systems and technology, buying books of business, and
Mhm.
then acquiring new agencies. And the kind of the measure of that is that the kind of the top line metric that people are looking at is revenue per employee. Now, revenue per employee, we think, is a good metric for indicating production capacity. But what it doesn't tell you is the cost of servicing that production. And so as we think about the kind of the bigger opportunity, it's not that we're chasing growth. It's what we really need is to chase profitable growth. And there's a difference. All these things are important. They all have a place. But actually, the way we think about them is they're necessary, but they're not sufficient for profitable growth.
Mhm.
Quite often, they can be inefficient, and often they can even be counterproductive and underperform. And why is that? So let me give you some examples. We hire producers and specialists. Let's say you hire a new producer,
Mhm.
and that person comes in with experience and their own way of doing things, and they have a service team underneath them, and that service team does it their way. Now, their way may be different from the way that other producers run their service teams, and that just adds kind of variability and inconsistency in how people are performing similar functions within the organization. That can create some challenges. We see people buying new systems, but they're really focused on getting the data clean and converting the data from one system to the other, but often without a great amount of focus and emphasis on looking back at their processes, running swim lane maps, figuring out those processes obsolete, is there a standard way that we can do things, can we fit these processes in with the new system. And so, you talk about fitting a round peg into a square hole. Unless that kind of prep work has been done, investing in automation and new systems and technology alone doesn't necessarily drive greater efficiency and, and productivity. Buying a book of business or acquiring an agency, again, if you're adding additional assets without creating integration in terms of consistent workflows, processes, and procedures, again, it doesn't necessarily drive down the cost of servicing the business. So it can add growth, it can add top line, but it doesn't necessarily add profitable growth. And so a key metric for thinking about profitable growth, which I'm going to talk about, is contribution per employee. And so these are one of my two magic metrics that I'm going to talk about in this session. So necessary but not sufficient. Why is that? Because they're basically adding variability and complexity. Each one of these things that I described, hiring new producers, investing in new systems, buying acquiring a new agency, they add complexity, and insofar as there's increased variability about how work is being performed within an organization, that variability drives inefficiency and waste. And so that's why they're necessary for growth, but not sufficient for profitable growth. So as a result of that, we often find that the drivers of profitable growth are just not well understood. And so, for instance, we ask managers, do you know the average break-even cost of an account? Do you know which accounts or products are profitable or unprofitable? Would you know how to improve account profitability if you were tasked with improving the profitability of an account? And do you know how to differentiate service levels between different accounts? So do you have segmentation between accounts, and does that segmentation result in differentiated service levels so you're not over-servicing some accounts and under-servicing other accounts? These are the kinds of questions that I think are important when it gets to that cost of servicing, which drives the profitability of the business.
You know, I'm a total believer in this. I think that the magic words that I have is that understand the agency, you understanding your agency and the finances and everything else. And I think most agents really haven't a clue about some of these things. Well, they say, oh, that's a big account and we don't spend much time on it, so it's profitable, or you know, whatever. But I don't really think the average break-even cost of accounts has ever been considered by the mass majority of agents.
And part of the reason for that has been that it's been traditionally quite difficult to get good data from our systems.
Right, I agree with that, yeah.
And so, you know, when you can't get good operational data, then it makes measuring your operations very difficult. And so you have to go at it in different ways. There's also been a kind of a preference in the industry for focusing on higher level financial metrics without so much of the operational metrics. And yes, again, that's aligned to this notion of revenue per employee. But if you want to get into understanding the cost of servicing that business, you need to be able to get deeper into these numbers.
Good.
So our view is that these metrics ultimately should be familiar to everybody, And at the very least, these concepts, these kinds of concepts that you see on this slide, and everyone should be at least be working towards understanding how to derive the numbers and get a good sense of how you're performing. There's a some people may be familiar with Toyota's value and waste wheel, in which they look over time. They've basically built this body of knowledge about how much activity is considered value added versus necessary work and versus waste. And what they've found in their research is that about 1/3 of all activity is what they would describe as value added. And this carries across all kinds of industries, manufacturing, service industries. And value added really means, do your clients value it? Does it differentiate you? Is it something they'd pay for if you told them about it? Is it core to who you are as a business? And then waste, there's all different kinds of categories of waste, but waste is basically activities that are not, either they're redundant or they're not are really driving any value, real value to the clients. You know, we often talk to agency owners and staff, and they say that their biggest challenge is they don't have enough hours in the day to do all the things they want.
I hear that every day.
Drive more revenue, develop greater customer intimacy, delight clients, develop new products, things like that. But what our experience and our data shows is that between 30 to 50% of all the time spent by their team is what we might call, and excuse the term, zombie time, right? So think of this as hours either spent doing the right things inefficiently, or worse, spent doing the wrong things that are posing as the right things.
Got it.
And so what we have to do is we have to figure out a way to differentiate between good, healthy hours that lead us forward, that drive the business forward, that the clients value, that deliver peace of mind to the client, and all the other, what we might call zombie hours in their midst, that are holding us back. And the challenge is that most organizations don't have the analytical tools, the methodologies, the data to tell the difference between profitable time and this kind of zombie time, let alone reclaim all for the good. So one of the best ways, one of the best tools to become a zombie slayer is good metrics. Making that time visible so people understand how to value the work they do. So let's just talk. Let's just talk some general principles so that we all get on the same page. So here's a way to look at the opportunity, and I've really kind of simplified the numbers here. So let's say you have an agency that has $10 million of revenue, and let's say that their compensation costs are 50% of that. So that would be typically quite low. Typically we see compensation costs, 60 to 65% of revenues. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, it's 50%. So the compensation costs are $5 million, and the revenues are $10 million. And in this particular agency, they're at about a 15% profit margin, EBITDA margin. So now let's assume, instead of 50% waste, which is what Toyota talks about, let's say there's 20% waste. Let's be more modest in our assumption. What this means is, the bad news is that 20% of that time spent by the people working within that agency is not generating revenue. It's redundant time for one reason or another. So that's kind of scary. That's kind of disappointing. You have $1 million that is not being put to active use. But if you think about it from a compensation to revenue ratio, previously you looked at it and you said, oh, there's a 1 to 2 ratio. $1 of compensation is generating $2 of revenue. What you see when you realize that 20% of this time is waste, $1 million is not generating revenue, actually suggests that $1 of compensation is actually generating $2.5 of revenue. So there's actually a little bit of a silver lining here. So that if you could find a way to recapture that waste and reapply the people to activities that are generating revenue, handling more accounts, improving retention, improving service quality, loyalty, cross-selling accounts, all those good things. If you could find a way of getting the distractions off the desk and putting that time back into productive use, if you set that $1 of compensation to $2.5 of revenue, that $1 million could actually generate an additional $2.5 million of revenue. That $1 million of comp could generate $2.5 million of additional revenue.
That all sounds
So
like it sounds magic, but I'm not sure any agent understands what's waste. I'm not sure I do.
Well, I'm going to get to that.
Okay, all right.
But at least the principle here I'm making that I'm establishing is that if we could identify time that is not generating revenue in the business, and you could bring that back on tap, that can actually generate incremental revenues, much of which would drop to the bottom line because all of your overheads have already been paid for.
Wow.
You would have some expense that you'd have to pay in additional commission to your producers and bonuses to your service team. But you know, if only 50% of that dropped to the bottom line, you'd be at $2.75 million of EBITDA of operating profit.
Yeah. Wow.
So it's a huge opportunity. It's a hugely profitable opportunity to basically convert inefficient time into productive time. Basically, we're talking about improving productivity. So as you asked the question, George, you know, what is that waste?
Okay.
Can I convince you that 20% of the activity of people is spent on waste? So there's things like workflow interruptions. You know, nobody has any of those, I'm sure. But
yeah, right.
People stepping in.
Whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Overqualified processing. Yeah.
You have overqualified people doing very basic. You know, senior account executives doing processing work, producers doing processing work. Overproduction. This is when you are providing a higher level of service than a particular account merits, based on perhaps the revenue or the profitability of the account. It could be rekeying of data into multiple systems. Following up for missing information is a constant problem. You know, you could have multiple calls to the same people trying to catch up on that information. Knockouts and declinations. You work on an account and then you get well into the process and then you realize it doesn't fit the carrier appetite. Errors and rework. So you work on something, you miss a property schedule, you come back to it later on. You've got to figure out what went wrong in the process. E&O incidents, which are that previous one writ large, where it's now become a real problem. Perhaps there's been a claim and the incorrect information was in there. And then employee turnover, which you know, we find that the cost of turnover is usually an employee's salary, annual salary is the cost of turnover. So all of these things drive waste within an organization, and so you know, at least 20% of people's time could be spent with these kinds of activities.
All right.
Here's another example of the difference between how we think of our processes as you know, relatively efficient. This shows a simple system. Information's delivered to the right person who moves it through the process, and hopefully it results in a proposal, and that proposal will hopefully be accepted and result in an order to bind. So this may be the way that a manager sees the process. Certainly in a perfect world it would look pretty much like this. In reality, what we often see is a process that is rife with missing information, incomplete data, errors, inconsistency, unpredictability, a process interrupted by phone calls, billing questions, producer emergencies that have to be handled right now, vacations, absenteeism, turnover, and a host of other human resource conditions. So this starting to get these things visible is the first step to figuring out how you can streamline workflows and then optimize the environment, the operational environment.
This ought to be on the wall of every insurance agency. Yeah,
so
go ahead.
This brings us to our first magic metric. Now, I'm a little afraid of the word magic because it kind of suggests something that's not real. This is very real, but the power of it is very significant.
Right.
And we've, at ResourcePro, we've been looking for metrics that tell a story. And we looked for a while for a metric out there that we thought was the best metric for describing productivity. And that metric is what we call a contribution per employee. And some people call this spread per employee. Now, we didn't invent this metric. Organizations like Marshberry and Reagan and Associates have been using this metric for a while. But what we found is that it is very rarely used. Even the organizations that measure it and are part of the IABA best practices study, even those organizations that have this data are very rarely managing their business to it. They'd far more likely to be managing their business to a revenue per employee metric than a contribution per employee metric. And that's the opportunity that we really see. So, and again, revenue per employee doesn't give you an indication of how you go about supporting the business or how you go about increasing growth and profitability through greater efficiency and effectiveness. So let me explain what contribution per employee is.
Okay.
You basically derive it. You start off by looking at your revenue per employee, so the revenue divided by the number of employees, and then you look at your compensation, your average compensation per employee, so you can get this by your total comp divided by your number of employees. And what that gives you is the contribution of each employee to the organization before you factor in any of your overheads. So it's actually a good measure of productivity because it's not factoring in all of your fixed costs. It's just the revenue minus your compensation costs.
Right, right.
And so when we look at some of the benchmarking data out there, and this is from the IABA Reagan Best Practice Study, and this is kind of a simplification, rounding up of the numbers, but basically this is from the 2012 study, and it's for agencies with revenues between $10 and $25 million. And you see, for each different size segment, you see similar kinds of numbers. What we see is that there can be significant differences between top performers and average performers in terms of the contribution of each employee to the agency. And this, in this example, it shows that there's about a $20,000 difference between the top quartile performers and the average performers within the study, and that represents $20,000 of contribution. So if you have a 100-person agency, for instance, that $20,000 represents $2 million of contribution. So the top performers, with the same people, basically, you could think of it that way, are generating $2 million more of revenue and therefore contribution than the average performers.
I just never hear contribution per employee talked about very much until now, till you. And maybe they do, I just don't hear it. And I've been paying attention to Reagan and the IAB thing for best practices for 40 years. But still, you just don't hear. Am I wrong, or did I miss something?
I think very few people are looking at it as a metric to manage a business or a department by.
I don't either.
This is the opportunity we see.
Yeah.
That if you can increase the contribution of each employee, and you don't do it in one like fell swoop. You do it, cumulatively, by looking at different parts of the business step by step. But the idea is if you can set a target around improving contribution per employee by, hey, let's improve it by $5,000 or $10,000 or $20,000. Set the target, incent everybody around that target. The opportunity is enormous because, as you see here, it can increase the contribution to the business by $2 million. Now, that's even more significant. I'm going to come into why that's even more significant than it even appears here.
Okay.
But I want to come to my magic metric number 2 first. And this is what we call premium to profit ratio. And this is the idea of this is how much premium do you need to write to drop $1 to the bottom line? So if you were to assume, let's say, a 20% profit margin, 20% EBITDA, earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization, so 20% EBITDA margin, and let's assume that when you factor in different kinds of products you have from workers' comp and other things on the low end, let's say your average commission is about 10%, then the way you think about this is that $1 drop to the bottom line would require $50 of premium written, 50 to 1 ratio. And what I definitely encourage everybody to do is to figure out for your organization, now your profit margin may be higher than that, and your average commission may be also higher, maybe it's 15%, maybe your profit margin is 25%. But figure out for your organization what your premium to profit margin is. And the reason is we're all chasing premium, and we think about how much premium people can write. And I think it's rather than to start from the top and then go down, it will be better to start from the bottom and go up. In other words, to start from what is each dollar of profit worth in terms of additional premium. Because if we can increase productivity and profitability, it's going to have that much greater impact on the revenue and premium we write. So let me show you how that plays out.
All right.
So let's come back to our example of an agency that is an average performing agency at $60,000 of contribution per employee, looking to get to a top quartile performance of $80,000. That $20,000, let's say again using simple numbers of a 100-person agency, is worth $2 million of additional contribution. The new commission equivalent to that at a 20% profit margin, so think of $2 million times 5 basically, is $10 million of a new commission. That's the equivalent. And a new premium equivalency, if you have again an average commission rate of 10%, would be $100 million. So the impact of increasing contribution per employee by $20,000 in this 100-person agency would be equivalent to writing an additional $100 million of premium, or $10 million of additional revenue.
Wow. Knocks your socks off. That's serious money.
So what we're talking about is increasing the productivity of your existing people, of creating more efficient workflows, of what we call the 4 S's: standardization of what could be ad hoc ways of performing the business right now, segmentation of accounts so that you have different service levels based on the value of an account, streamlining workflows so you get the work done correctly the first time, and you eliminate redundancy, and you kind of triage things on the front end, and sourcing the right work to the right person within the organization and with a partner if you go down that route.
Okay.
And so these are the ways that you start to impact that contribution per employee number. And so we looked at, in contrast to that, how are agencies typically looking to drive growth. And if we wanted to generate $10 million of additional commission, as a comparison, how many new producers would we need to achieve that? So let's assume that you're hiring new producers, and that a new producer coming in can write $100,000 of new commission in a year. How many new producers would you need to get you that $10 million?
Good question.
So at $100,000 of new commission a year, you'd need 100 new producers. That's what it would be equivalent to. However, that's actually underrepresenting the true story, because as we all know, only 50% of producers validate. In some cases, it can be a lot worse than that. So actually, the number might be closer to 200.
Oh my gosh.
And here's the thing: you're hiring these people, and again, if you don't have good systems and processes in place, everybody's coming in with their own way of doing it. That's just adding to the variability and complexity of the environment. Now, imagine, I would say, okay, but you're not going to, even if you engage in process improvement and productivity improvement, you're not going to probably see that impact, a $20,000 increase in contribution per employee in a single year. What if we did that over a 5-year period? What would that be equivalent to in terms of number of producers? So just using, I just ran this scenario in which each producer is generating $100,000 of new commission a year and retaining 80% of their business.
I got you.
And maybe these are conservative numbers.
Yes.
You still need basically nine new producers hired in year 1 to have an equivalent effect. But again, as we know, only 50% validate, so you'd actually have to hire 18 producers in year 1 to have that same impact. So the point that we're making is, you've got existing resources. You have people trained, experienced, valued, and valuable within the organization who've already validated. Producers, senior account executives, people within the organization, account managers who have experience and they want to serve. This is a service industry where people want to serve and love to give great service to their clients. And if we could identify the waste and inefficiency that's bogging them down, that leads them to say, I don't have enough hours in the day. If you could create those hours in the day, if you could create capacity for them through standardization, segmentation, streamlining, and sourcing, you can have the same impact before you go hire anybody else. And then every time you hire a producer or a specialist, you bring them into this environment, that contribution, that impact is going to be that much greater.
I'm thinking. My silence is thinking.
So here's what we suggest. We suggest that everybody sets a productivity target. And the way they do that is, first of all, calculate your current contribution per employee, and then chat to your teams about setting a new contribution target. Ideally, incent the teams to achieve that. Maybe that becomes part of a bonus structure. Because what you're incenting the team to do now is to drive not just growth and not just profitability, but profitable growth by achieving that. And then once you have that new contribution target, you can calculate the impact or the equivalency in terms of what that contribution would be equal to in terms of new commission or new premiums, based on your contribution and your premium to profit ratio. And what we've made available through this podcast is a tool where people can just go calculate that for themselves. So we're providing a link for that, and what they'll see is this calculator where they can input their revenues, the number of employees they have. If they don't know the current compensation as a percentage of revenues, we've just plugged in 62%, but if you know that number, you can plug in your number. This will then calculate for you all of these numbers as a result of those three inputs.
Well, people I just want to mention to people right now, you can get this automatically when you go back to the email. I'm going to have a link right there, and there's no cost to this. I think this is a magnificent thing you're doing here. So, excuse me for interrupting. Go ahead.
No, my pleasure, my pleasure. So this will calculate for you your revenue per employee, your compensation per employee, and your contribution per employee. Now you can go online and you can go and look at the IAA best practice study. You could talk to Marshberry. You can get benchmarks easily through Reagan or Marshberry. You can get benchmarks for how you look relative to other organizations of your size. The IAA best practice study breaks it down as an example. But I think it's it's one thing to compare yourself to others within your segment, but I think it's even more important to be able to compare yourself, to set targets for yourself, so you can say, here's where we are today and here's where we want to be tomorrow. So this is the first part of the tool we're providing. The second part of the tool is it takes that contribution per employee number, and you set, in the second box, you can set a target. What do we want to get that contribution to be? We want to increase it by $5,000, $10,000. It will tell you what your increased total contribution would be, what the commission equivalent would be at a 20% margin, and the premium equivalent at a 50-to-1 premium to profit ratio. Now, if your margins are different to that, you can always calculate that for your organization.
Sure.
We just put those as defaults in there, but it gives you a directional sense as to what those commission and premium equivalents would be. Now, this is only the first step. Once you've got this, it now kind of invites the conversation with your service teams to say, how can we go about achieving that? How can we identify areas of waste and inefficiency? What are the things we spend our time on that we wish we didn't have to, or that we don't think are a productive use of our time? And you can survey your employees, and they'll tell you, because they know. And if you ask your employees, what would you rather be spending your time doing that would increase your contribution to the business, they probably know that too. And so then you can start to engage in various kinds of projects that would, over time, start to impact these numbers. So that's the main message. So kind of the summary is to increase profitable growth, not just profitability, but putting those two things together. Shift your focus from revenue per employee to contribution per employee, and then incent your teams to manage this number. And second of all, understand your premium to profit ratio to understand the impact of improving productivity versus buying premium in the form of hiring producers, buying a book of business, or acquiring other firms.
You know, I think that's one of the most vital slides I've ever seen in my presentations here, right there. Yeah, I think that slide is going to change the way a great many insurance agents now think. So congratulations. Wrap it up.
I hope it's helpful. We've seen through our interaction with our clients and with the people that we talk to in the industry that this can be a very helpful way to kind of focus attention on how to service business more efficiently and effectively.
Great.
And you know, improving productivity ultimately is the fastest, most sustainable, least expensive, and least risky way to increase company value, shareholder value, which is what we're all chasing at the end of the day.
Well, you've got this slide should be your the motto of what you're doing. for your. Before we leave here, and I think these are just wonderful. Tell me a little bit about, or tell us a little bit about ResourcePro, will you please?
With pleasure. Thanks, George. Well, you know, we're a company that is focused on insurance operations and facilitating profitable growth through operations excellence. And we see you know, operational practices as being this domain that if you can really get great at that, it can drive capacity to people, create the time needed for innovation, for new product development, for you know, just driving top and bottom line growth. So we're focused on that, and we do that really through 4 ways. We create capacity by allowing employees to delegate tasks that they don't consider to be value added to us, and we will perform those functions on their behalf. So we have a business process outsourcing component to it. We also do it by helping agencies understand with that newfound capacity, what's the best use of that time. And very often there isn't a great deal of clarity around that because maybe the connection between processes and business strategy hasn't been, you know, aligned. And so aligning business processes to business strategy indicates if I have two accounts coming across my desk at the same time, which one I should be focused on first. Or if I have 2 accounts, which should get a higher level of service versus the other based on what it means to my business, how closely aligned it is to my core business strategy, or how much it contributes in revenue and profitability. So aligning processes to strategy is kind of the second thing we do through our advisory practice. Thirdly, what we do is we provide training around operational skill sets. We find that in this industry there's a lack of training around operations management, and so we provide courses on different aspects of productivity and leadership and change management, performance management, problem solving, all kinds of things, error proofing. So we provide training around that so that, let's say you now understand how to use that capacity, you have your processes aligned, the training allows you to execute effectively. And then the final piece of what we do is provide analytics, is to help people manage their businesses by measuring the right drivers of productivity on their business and get better understanding of that so that everybody has visibility on what activities will have an impact on performance.
Well, what you do is just amazing. We have a number of friends. I have a number of friends around in the business who utilize your program and have for quite a long time, and they're loving it. I won't go through all that right now and quote them, but if anybody wants to know somebody to refer, somebody who's using it, let me know, and I'll give you some names that you can't miss. Listen, if you want to get hold of Dan, we could talk a long time, or Dan could talk a long time about this, but I love his 3 words, do what counts. That's what it all boils down to. Where'd that come from, Dan? Is that your motto?
Well, you know, we kind of poke fun a little bit at Nike because they have this tagline, just do it. And our view is that is the kind of tagline for, you know, a generation ago. We've all been just doing it for ages, and we've been left with legacy systems and processes. Right now we have to do what counts, and I think this particularly speaks to the millennial generation, but it speaks to all of us. We all want to do what's meaningful and what's relevant and what's most aligned to driving value for our clients and for our own business.
Well, you're sure doing what counts, and I appreciate it. And you can call Dan there, and that's his phone number. He'll certainly talk to you. You know, they have people all over the country now, but that's the best way to go to him, I think, is just go great there. I say all over the country, all over the world, for that matter. Well, Dan, thank you again. And in the meantime, for the rest of you, don't forget you can go back now to the email and order that calculator. I just can't imagine you not doing it. The price is right, and it's going to be very, very helpful too. It's going to change your way of life. And these Monday mornings are getting more and more fascinating, at least to me. I hope they are to you too. We now have over 50,000 people receiving them. I don't know how many open it, but I hope you pass it along to all your friends. And in the meantime, then, I'll see you next Monday morning.